Have you ever sat down with your family or friends and wondered why some people simply won't touch blood in their food, while others have no problem at all, even using it as a symbol in their religious ceremonies? Today we're diving into a fascinating question. Why do Jews and Muslims avoid eating blood, but many Christians do not? At first glance, it might seem like just another quirky food rule, but as we dig deeper, you'll see how these dietary practices have roots that go far back in history, tied to sacred texts, cultural identity, and ideas about what it means to be pure or set apart. In this video, we're going to explore the ancient reasons behind these practices, look at how religious texts and traditions shaped them, and see how all these old rules still influence the way people live and eat today. We'll be comparing the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian approaches and learning about the symbolism of blood, why it is seen as something holy, life-giving, and even dangerous. So whether you're curious about your own background or just love learning about how different cultures and religions shape everyday life, stick around. We're about to uncover a story that blends history, theology, and real-world practices, and by the end you'll have a better grasp of how something as basic as what we eat can carry deep, spiritual meaning. Before we jump in, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. Now, let's get started. Scriptural and historical foundations of the prohibition of blood. Let's start our journey deep into history and scripture to understand how the rule against consuming blood came to be. In ancient times, blood wasn't just a part of an animal's body. It was seen as the very essence of life. In many ancient cultures, blood was considered sacred, powerful, and in some cases, magical. This is why early religious texts and traditions placed such strong emphasis on keeping blood separate from everyday food consumption. The first major source for this rule is found in the Hebrew Bible, particularly in the book of Leviticus. Leviticus 17 is one of the most direct passages we have. It tells the Israelites, "For the life of a creature is in its blood," and instructs them to drain the blood from the animal and not to consume it. Now, when you think about it, this rule wasn't arbitrary. Back then, people didn't have our modern understanding of biology or nutrition, but they were very much aware that blood was the life force. In an era when life was unpredictable and survival wasn't guaranteed, protecting that sacred gift was paramount. But why exactly was blood so important? In many ancient Near Eastern cultures, blood was seen as the spark of life given by a divine force. The idea was that the blood was not just a physical fluid, but a symbol of the very life that God had breathed into living creatures. By consuming blood, one might be seen as disrespecting or even misappropriating that divine life force. For the Israelites, who were developing a unique identity and a close relationship with God, these laws served as a way to set themselves apart. They weren't just following a health precaution, they were making a statement about who they were and what they valued. Beyond Leviticus, other parts of the Torah reinforce this idea. Deuteronomy, for example, echoes the prohibition against consuming blood, emphasizing that this wasn't a minor detail, but a central part of the covenant between God and the people of Israel. In these texts, blood becomes a symbol of the covenant. It reminds the Israelites that their lives are not their own, that every life is given by God and must be treated with reverence. This wasn't just about food, it was about living in a way that constantly reminded them of their special relationship with the divine. Moving on from the Hebrew Bible, let's consider how these ideas spread and evolved. The ancient Near East was a melting pot of cultures, each with its own rituals and beliefs. Many neighboring cultures also had taboos related to blood, though their reasons might have varied. For some, blood was used in sacrifices or ritual cleansings. For others, it was seen as a dangerous substance that could bring bad luck or invoke the wrath of the gods if not handled properly. In this context, the Israelites' strict rules can be seen as both a spiritual directive and a practical safeguard. It was a way to differentiate themselves from surrounding peoples while also protecting the community from the potential dangers associated with handling blood in a time without modern preservation methods. Now, let's turn our attention to Islam. The Quran carries forward many of these ancient ideas. Verses in the Quran, found in chapters like Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-Ma'idah, are quite clear about the prohibition. Consuming blood is forbidden. For Muslims, this isn't just a relic of the past. It's an ongoing command that ties into the broader concept of living a life in complete submission to God's will. Just as in the Hebrew tradition, blood in Islamic thought represents life itself. By forbidding its consumption, the Quran reinforces the idea that life is sacred and must be protected. The similarities between these religious texts aren't coincidental. When Islam emerged in the 7th century, it was entering a world where the ideas of sanctity and purity had already been firmly established by earlier traditions. The early Muslim community found common ground with the Jews of Arabia, and many of the dietary laws, including the ban on blood, were retained and integrated into Islamic law. However, the Quran goes even further in making these laws a clear and unequivocal command. There is little room for ambiguity. Blood is off limits, and this rule applies to every Muslim as an act of obedience and respect. One of the interesting aspects of this prohibition is the symbolism attached to blood. For both Jews and Muslims, blood isn't seen as just another ingredient in a meal. It's the very symbol of life, the physical embodiment of what makes a creature alive. Imagine for a moment the power of that idea. In a world where survival was a daily struggle, the thought that the very essence of life should be kept sacred was a powerful motivator. It wasn't just about health, although in many cases avoiding blood did help prevent disease. It was also about maintaining a constant awareness of the divine. Every time someone prepared or ate a meal, they were reminded of this fundamental truth. Life is sacred, and it comes from God. This idea of sacredness is further reinforced by the way these rules were passed down through generations. In both Judaism and Islam, the prohibition on consuming blood wasn't something that could be changed or reinterpreted lightly. It became a core part of religious education, a symbol of continuity, and a marker of identity. Parents taught their children about these laws from an early age, and community rituals centered around food reinforced these lessons. Over time, what might have begun as a practical rule became a deeply ingrained cultural and spiritual practice. Historically, scholars have also pointed out that these laws might have served another purpose in ancient times, protecting the community from health risks. In the arid climates of the Middle East, where food preservation was a constant challenge, consuming blood could pose significant health dangers. Without modern refrigeration or processing techniques, blood could quickly become a breeding ground for bacteria. Thus, the prohibition wasn't just a matter of spiritual discipline, it was also a smart public health measure. Over the centuries, even as our understanding of medicine evolved, the rule remained, now backed by a wealth of tradition and a deep-seated sense of what it means to live a holy life. Yet, despite the practical benefits, the primary emphasis has always been on the spiritual. The ancient texts make it clear that the real reason for avoiding blood is to honor the life force that it represents. Whether it's through the lens of the Torah or the Quran, blood is viewed as something that belongs solely to God, a sacred substance that should not be used for ordinary human purposes. This idea of keeping the divine intact is a powerful one, and it has helped shape the religious and cultural identities of entire communities. The influence of these ancient rules can still be seen today. In communities around the world, from the busy streets of New York to the ancient markets of Jerusalem or Marrakech, people adhere to these dietary laws not merely out of habit, but as a way of connecting with their history and their faith. The rule against consuming blood is a daily reminder of the past, a past filled with challenges, survival, and a deep, abiding reverence for life itself. Even as the modern world has moved forward, these age-old practices continue to remind people of who they are and where they come from. As we wrap up this section on the scriptural and historical foundations, it's important to see that the prohibition against consuming blood is not just an isolated rule. It's part of a larger system of beliefs that has shaped the lives and identities of millions of people over thousands of years. Whether you're reading from the pages of Leviticus or listening to a recitation of the Quran, the message is the same. Life is sacred, and every drop of blood is a gift that should be treated with the utmost respect. Ritual purity and identity in Judaism. Now that we've delved into the ancient texts and historical context behind the prohibition on blood, let's explore how these ideas became woven into the very fabric of Jewish identity. For Jews, following dietary laws is far more than just a set of rules about food. It's a way of life, a daily practice that reinforces who they are as a people and as individuals. Jewish dietary laws, known collectively as kashrut, have been a cornerstone of Jewish life for millennia. These laws aren't just about avoiding blood. They cover everything from the types of animals that can be eaten to the ways in which food should be prepared and served. But at the heart of it all lies the rule about blood, a rule that speaks to the sacredness of life and the unique relationship between the Jewish people and God. At its most basic level, the command to avoid consuming blood is about honoring the gift of life. In the Torah, when it is said, "The life of a creature is in its blood," it's not just a statement of fact, it's a profound declaration of the sanctity of life. By refusing to consume blood, Jews are reminded that every living creature is endowed with a spark of divine life, something that should be treated with reverence. It's a constant reminder that life is precious and that every action, even something as seemingly simple as eating, can have spiritual significance. This daily practice of mindfulness isn't something that happens automatically. For generations, rabbis and scholars have painstakingly interpreted and expanded on these commandments, creating a rich tapestry of laws and customs that guide everyday life. The Talmud, a central text in Jewish tradition, contains countless discussions and debates about how best to observe these laws. There are detailed instructions on how to properly drain blood from meat, how long to wait between slaughter and cooking, and even what to do if you accidentally come into contact with blood. These rules might seem overwhelming at first, but they serve a very important purpose. They turn every meal into a deliberate act of worship and remembrance. Imagine sitting down at a family dinner table and knowing that every bite you take is a conscious choice to live in accordance with a tradition that stretches back thousands of years. It's not just about following a rule. It's about participating in a shared heritage that defines you as part of a community. Every time an observant Jew prepares a meal, there's an unspoken message that goes along with it. A message that says, "I belong to a people who honor life and who have a special relationship with God." This isn't just about food, it's about identity. For many Jews, keeping kosher is a way of maintaining a distinct identity in a world that often seems overwhelming and fast-paced, especially in times when Jewish communities have been scattered or persecuted. These dietary laws have served as a unifying force, a constant, tangible reminder of who they are and what they stand for. In the kitchen, in the synagogue, and even in everyday conversations, the rules of kashrut help reinforce a sense of belonging. They create boundaries, not to exclude, but to preserve a way of life that has been passed down through countless generations. But it's not just a matter of tradition for the sake of tradition. There is a deep spiritual dimension to these practices. The act of preparing food according to kosher guidelines is seen as a form of service to God. It's a way of sanctifying the ordinary. The act of eating becomes elevated to a spiritual ritual. This idea is beautifully captured in the concept of the domestic altar. For many Jewish families, the kitchen and dining table are not just places to eat. They are sacred spaces where every meal is an opportunity to connect with God, to remember the covenant, and to express gratitude for the gift of life. Over the centuries, Jewish communities have developed an array of practices and traditions to help pass these laws on from one generation to the next. From the careful separation of meat and dairy to the specific methods of slaughter known as shechita, every detail is designed to maintain a level of purity that goes beyond the physical. These practices are taught from a young age, and they become a part of who a person is. They shape not only what is eaten, but how one thinks about food, community, and even morality. In today's modern world, keeping these ancient traditions alive isn't always easy. With the advent of mass-produced food and global supply chains, there are more challenges than ever to ensure that food meets the strict requirements of kashrut. Yet, the commitment to these practices remains strong. Jewish certification agencies, community organizations, and even technology have all stepped in to help maintain these age-old standards. Whether it's a small family kitchen in a busy city or a large synagogue in a remote town, the spirit of these laws continues to thrive. It's also worth noting that these practices have a social and even political dimension. In many parts of the world, sharing a kosher meal is a powerful statement of solidarity and identity. It tells the world that despite the pressures of modernity, there are communities that remain committed to living according to ancient values. This commitment fosters a sense of pride and resilience, a reminder that cultural and religious identity is something to be celebrated, not hidden away. There's also a personal, introspective side to all of this. For many Jews, the act of observing these dietary laws is deeply intertwined with the idea of self-discipline and spiritual growth. Every time they choose to prepare and eat food in a certain way, it's a reminder that they are constantly striving to be better, to live a life that is in harmony with the values of their ancestors. It's a form of mindfulness that touches every part of life, from the mundane to the profound. This isn't to say that the process is without its challenges. There are times when modern lifestyles, busy schedules, and the pressures of everyday life can make it hard to keep up with all the details of kashrut. But for many, these challenges are outweighed by the benefits. The act of keeping kosher becomes a daily reaffirmation of one's identity and a concrete way of staying connected to a long and storied past. It's also fascinating to see how these ancient practices influence modern ethical debates. In an age where questions about animal welfare, sustainable food production, and ethical consumption are at the forefront, many find that the principles underlying kashrut offer valuable insights. The care taken in the process, from the humane slaughtering of animals to the meticulous attention to cleanliness, reflects a broader concern for respect and responsibility. In this way, what might seem like a strictly religious practice also speaks to universal values about how we treat life and nature. At its core, the Jewish commitment to avoiding blood isn't about imposing restrictions for the sake of rules. It's about creating a way of life that honors the mystery and sanctity of existence. It's about reminding every person that their actions, even something as simple as choosing what to eat, are connected to a larger divine purpose. The very idea that the life of a creature is in its blood becomes a daily mantra, a call to live with awareness, gratitude, and respect. As we reflect on these ideas, it becomes clear that the ancient rules about blood are not relics of a bygone era. They are living traditions that continue to shape the way people experience their world. For many Jews, every meal prepared and every law observed is a reaffirmation of a sacred heritage. It's a way to bridge the gap between the past and the present, ensuring that the wisdom and values of thousands of years continue to guide daily life. In many ways, the story of Jewish dietary laws is a story about the power of tradition. It shows how a simple commandment can evolve into a rich, multi-layered practice that touches every aspect of life, from the way food is prepared to the way communities are built. It's a reminder that the rituals and routines of everyday life can be transformed into acts of spiritual significance when they are infused with intention and meaning. Ultimately, the prohibition on consuming blood is one of the most striking examples of how ancient wisdom continues to resonate in the modern world. For Jews, this isn't just about food safety or cultural identity, it's about preserving a way of life that honors the divine spark in every living being. And as long as there are people who believe in the sacredness of life, these practices will continue to be a vital part of what it means to be Jewish. Islamic perspectives on dietary laws and the prohibition of blood. When we look at Islam, we find that its dietary laws are part of a broader lifestyle dedicated to obedience, purity, and respect for life. In Islam, food isn't just a source of nourishment, it's an act of worship, a way of honoring Allah by following His commands to the letter. One of the most important aspects of these guidelines is the prohibition against consuming blood. The Quran makes it clear that blood is forbidden. Several verses address this directly. For example, in Surah Al-Baqarah, believers are reminded that forbidden to you are dead animals, blood, the flesh of swine. This command is repeated in other parts of the Quran, emphasizing that the consumption of blood is not a matter of personal taste or preference, but a divine ordinance meant to preserve both spiritual and physical purity. To understand why blood is so strictly prohibited, we need to consider the role that blood plays in Islamic thought. Blood is seen as the life force that connects every living creature to Allah. It's not just a nutrient or a bodily fluid, it's the very essence of life. In the pre-modern world, when life was fragile and illness rampant, the sacred nature of blood was even more pronounced. Muslims, like their Jewish neighbors, grew up with the idea that the life force is something that must remain in the hands of the Creator. Consuming it would be seen as interfering with the divine order, an act that could tarnish the purity required to live a life devoted to Allah. This emphasis on purity is woven throughout Islamic practice. The concept of halal, meaning permissible, is not limited only to food. It extends to all aspects of life: how one dresses, how one interacts with others, and even how one handles money. When it comes to food, halal guidelines provide a comprehensive framework. Not only must the food itself be free from forbidden substances like blood, but it also must be processed and prepared in a specific way that upholds the dignity of the life it once contained. The method of slaughter, known as dabihah, is designed to ensure that the animal's blood is thoroughly drained, symbolizing respect for the creature and preventing impurity. Historically, these practices emerged in a context where the dangers of improperly handled meat were very real. In the arid and often harsh climates of the Arabian Peninsula, preserving meat was a constant challenge. Without modern refrigeration, any substance that could quickly spoil, like blood, posed a significant health risk. Over time, the practical necessity of avoiding potentially dangerous substances merged with spiritual guidelines, reinforcing the idea that adhering to these rules was both a matter of faith and a safeguard against illness. For many Muslims, the prohibition of blood is also a way of distinguishing themselves in a multicultural society. In the early days of Islam, when the nascent Muslim community was still defining its identity, following dietary laws was a public, tangible way to signal one's belonging. Even as Islam spread far beyond Arabia, these practices continued to serve as markers of community and continuity. Today, whether one is dining in a bustling Middle Eastern market or a modern urban center in Europe or North America, the principles remain the same. Food must be prepared in accordance with divine instructions, and the sanctity of life must be respected by not consuming blood. But it's important to note that the Islamic approach to dietary laws is not about blind rule following. Islamic jurisprudence, or fiqh, has evolved over centuries as scholars have debated and clarified what exactly is required to meet the standards of halal. The discussions in classical texts reveal a community deeply engaged with questions of purity, ethics, and practicality. Questions such as, how can one be sure all the blood is drained? Or, what happens if there's a mistake in the slaughtering process? Were tackled by early jurists who set out detailed guidelines to ensure that these commandments were followed as accurately as possible. This legal tradition continues today with modern certification bodies that inspect food production processes around the globe, ensuring that even in a highly industrialized world, the ancient rules remain intact. Another fascinating aspect of the Islamic perspective is how it ties into a broader worldview that values submission to Allah. The term Islam itself means submission, and this concept is reflected in every aspect of the believer's life. When a Muslim refuses to consume blood, it is not just an act of following a rule, it's an expression of complete trust in and surrender to the Creator. This is why many Muslims feel that their dietary choices are a daily form of worship. Every time they choose a halal product, they are actively aligning themselves with the divine will and reinforcing their commitment to living a life of purity and discipline. Moreover, the avoidance of blood is not isolated from other practices of cleanliness and order that define Muslim life. For instance, the rituals of wudu, ablution, before prayer, and ghusl, full-body purification, after certain events are daily reminders of the importance of cleanliness. In this way, dietary laws join hands with other elements of Islamic practice to form a coherent system in which the physical and the spiritual are intertwined. The prohibition against blood is just one thread in a vast tapestry that expresses a comprehensive vision of how a life in submission to Allah should be lived. In addition to these religious and practical reasons, there is also a symbolic aspect to the Islamic rejection of blood consumption. Blood is seen as the essence of life, and by extension, as something that belongs solely to Allah. To mix that sacred element with the profane world of everyday sustenance would be to blur the boundaries between the holy and the mundane. By keeping blood off the table, Muslims maintain a clear line that separates what is divine from what is common. This boundary is a constant reminder that while humans must live in the world, their ultimate allegiance is to a higher power. Every meal, therefore, becomes an opportunity to reaffirm that commitment. As modern Muslims navigate the complexities of a globalized food market, the age-old prohibition remains a potent symbol of their faith. Whether it's in traditional bazaars or in modern supermarkets, the search for halal-certified products is a daily affirmation of a timeless principle. New technologies and global trade have certainly changed the way food is produced and distributed, but the underlying commitment to these dietary laws remains unchanged. In fact, many modern food companies now seek halal certification as a way to reach a broader, faith-conscious market, demonstrating that ancient traditions can adapt and even thrive in today's world. Ultimately, the Islamic approach to the prohibition of blood is a rich blend of divine command, practical wisdom, and symbolic power. It reflects a deep-seated respect for life as a sacred gift and a constant reminder of the believer's duty to honor Allah in every aspect of life. For Muslims, these dietary laws are not just about what goes on the plate. They are about how one lives every day, maintaining a continual state of purity and devotion in a complex and ever-changing world. The Christian perspective on blood consumption. In contrast to Judaism and Islam, Christianity offers a very different take on the role of blood in dietary practices. When we look at the New Testament, we see a transformative message that shifts the focus from strict external observance to internal spiritual renewal. For many Christians, the Old Testament dietary laws, including the prohibition against consuming blood, are reinterpreted through the lens of the New Covenant established by Jesus Christ. One of the key turning points in Christian thought comes from the vision of Peter in Acts 10. In this dramatic episode, Peter sees a sheet descending from heaven, filled with all kinds of animals, both those that were considered clean and unclean by Jewish standards. A heavenly voice tells him, "Kill and eat." Peter is initially hesitant, clinging to the old rules he'd known all his life. But the message is clear. Nothing should be considered unclean if God has declared it to be so. This vision isn't simply about food, it's a powerful metaphor for the new reality brought about by Christ's teachings, where the focus shifts from ritual purity to the purity of one's heart and soul. This redefinition of purity is central to the Christian perspective on blood. Early Christian leaders, particularly the Apostle Paul, argued that under the new covenant, physical laws, including dietary restrictions, no longer determine one's standing with God. In his letters to the Corinthians and Romans, Paul stresses that what truly matters is faith in Jesus Christ, not the meticulous observance of the law. The internal transformation brought about by Christ's sacrifice is what counts, not whether one follows specific rules about what to eat. In this light, the consumption of blood loses its former significance as a marker of impurity. Yet, it's important to note that while Christians generally do not see the consumption of blood as a sin or a marker of impurity, blood still holds profound symbolic importance. In the sacrament of the Eucharist, also known as Holy Communion, Christians partake of wine that represents the blood of Christ. This ritual is a central element of Christian worship and is imbued with deep theological meaning. It commemorates the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, a sacrifice believed to atone for the sins of humanity and establish a new, unbreakable covenant between God and his people. In this context, the idea of blood is transformed from something forbidden to a symbol of redemption, hope, and eternal life. For many Christians, then, the symbolism of blood transcends its literal meaning. It becomes a metaphor for the transformative power of God's grace, a grace that cleanses the believer from sin and brings about spiritual rebirth. The shift from Old Covenant dietary laws to New Covenant freedom is one of the most significant theological developments in Christian thought. Instead of focusing on what is forbidden, the emphasis is placed on what is granted through faith, freedom, forgiveness, and a new way of living that centers on love and inner purity rather than ritualistic compliance. Historically, this transition wasn't without controversy. In the early church, there were debates about whether converted Gentiles should be required to follow any remnants of the Jewish law, including dietary restrictions. The Council of Jerusalem, described in Acts 15, represents a pivotal moment in which the apostles and elders decided that Gentile believers did not need to adopt the full Mosaic law to be part of the Christian community. This decision underscored a fundamental shift. What was once a rigid boundary marker, like the prohibition against blood, was now seen as non-essential for salvation. In other words, the focus moved from external adherence to the law to the inner work of faith. As Christianity evolved over the centuries, its stance on dietary laws and the consumption of blood continued to develop. In many regions of Europe, for example, the remnants of Old Testament dietary restrictions gradually faded away as the Church emphasized the universality of Christ's sacrifice and the inclusive nature of the New Covenant. Today, most Christians regard the old dietary prohibitions as having been fulfilled and transcended by the coming of Christ. However, the symbolic resonance of blood remains, particularly in liturgical contexts where the memory of Christ's sacrifice is central. Modern Christians often view the Eucharist as a living symbol of the new life promised by Jesus. The ritual of sharing bread and wine is not just a reenactment of an ancient event. It is a deeply personal reminder that every believer has access to God's grace, regardless of their dietary choices. The wine, symbolizing Christ's blood, is a testament to the belief that salvation and transformation come from within, through faith rather than through adherence to a set of external rules. Yet, despite this theological freedom, there are still Christian groups and traditions that emphasize discipline and self-restraint, sometimes drawing on the symbolism of blood in unique ways. For instance, Certain denominations maintain fasting periods or abstain from certain foods as a form of spiritual discipline. Even though they do not view blood as inherently unclean, these practices are meant to remind the faithful of their dependence on God and their commitment to living a holy life. In this sense, while the New Covenant opens the door to freedom, many Christians choose to adopt self-imposed guidelines as a way of deepening their spiritual practice. The conversation about blood in Christian thought is also enriched by the historical context of martyrdom and sacrifice. For early Christians who faced persecution, the shedding of blood was a stark, painful reminder of the cost of discipleship. The blood of martyrs came to be seen as a powerful symbol of faith, the ultimate witness to the transformative power of God's love. This historical memory continues to influence Christian art, literature, and theology, reinforcing the idea that while the literal consumption of blood is not forbidden, the symbolic meaning of blood remains central to the Christian identity. In today's diverse Christian landscape, debates about dietary practices sometimes emerge in unexpected ways. For example, some modern theologians argue that while the physical laws regarding blood have been rendered obsolete by the New Covenant, the deeper moral and ethical lessons behind them still have relevance. They point to the fact that many ancient dietary laws were designed to protect not only individual health, but also the integrity of the community. Even if Christians no longer follow these rules literally, the underlying principles, respect for life, mindful consumption, and communal responsibility, are seen as timeless. This perspective invites believers to consider how ancient wisdom might inform modern ethical debates about food production, animal welfare, and environmental sustainability. At its core, the Christian perspective on blood consumption is a story of transformation, a journey from strict adherence to a set of external rules to a more nuanced understanding of grace, redemption, and inner purity. While Jews and Muslims continue to see the avoidance of blood as a vital expression of their covenant with God, Christians have reinterpreted the symbolism of blood in light of Christ's sacrifice. The result is a faith that is less concerned with what is forbidden and more focused on the freedom and hope offered by the gospel. In the end, whether one views blood as something that must be strictly avoided or as a symbol of divine sacrifice depends largely on one's theological framework. For many Christians, the message is clear. What matters most is not what you eat, but what you believe, and how that belief transforms your heart and life. The celebration of the Eucharist, with its potent symbolism of Christ's blood, is a daily reminder of that truth. It encapsulates the Christian journey from the old law to the new, from external conformity to internal transformation, offering a model of faith that is both deeply personal and universally resonant. Theological and symbolic interpretations across traditions. When we talk about blood in the context of religion, we're dealing with one of the most potent symbols imaginable. For Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike, blood isn't just a component of food, it's a signifier of life sacrifice and even covenant with the divine. In Jewish thought, blood is tied directly to the concept of life. The Torah tells us that the life of a creature is in its blood. This idea runs deep. Blood is sacred because it carries the life force that God has given. To consume blood would be to disrespect that divine spark. For centuries, Jewish traditions have stressed the importance of keeping blood out of one's diet as a way to honor the gift of life and maintain ritual purity. This wasn't only about physical health, it was a spiritual practice designed to set the Jewish people apart. Islam shares a very similar sentiment. In the Quran, blood is consistently portrayed as something that should be kept pure, reinforcing the broader theme of obedience to God's commands. When Muslims avoid blood, they're not just following a rule. They're participating in a tradition that emphasizes cleanliness, respect for life, and a deep sense of gratitude toward the Creator. In both Judaism and Islam, The prohibition isn't just a dietary guideline. It's a symbol of a larger commitment to live a life that honors and protects the sacredness of life. Christians, on the other hand, see blood through a different lens. The blood of Christ is seen as a symbol of ultimate sacrifice and redemption. In the context of the Eucharist, the act of drinking wine, which symbolizes Christ's blood, is a profound reminder of the sacrifice that led to the new covenant. For many Christians, this ritual isn't about celebrating the consumption of blood in a literal sense. It's about remembering a spiritual truth, that sacrifice, love, and redemption are the cornerstones of their faith. The dramatic shift in the New Testament, from a focus on external purity to an emphasis on inner grace, allows for a reinterpretation of what blood means in everyday life. What ties these interpretations together is the idea that blood carries immense power. It's a visible reminder of life, a marker of identity, and a symbol of sacrifice. Whether it's used to enforce strict dietary rules or to celebrate a miraculous act of redemption, blood is at the heart of how these traditions understand their relationship with the divine. Scholars and theologians have debated these meanings for centuries. Some argue that the different interpretations are rooted in historical contexts. Ancient societies faced real dangers from consuming improperly prepared blood, while others see the differences as reflective of deeper, philosophical divides. In Judaism and Islam, the emphasis on physical purity and communal identity played a key role in shaping these dietary laws. For Christians, however, the focus on individual salvation and the internal state of the heart allowed for a more flexible approach. These symbolic interpretations aren't just academic discussions. They have real-life implications for how people live. The way a community understands blood can affect everything from family meals to interfaith dialogue. When we see these differences side by side, it becomes clear that while the symbol of blood is universal, its meaning can vary widely depending on context. Now that we've delved into the deeper symbolism, let's shift gears and consider some practical and socio-cultural reasons behind these dietary practices. Were there practical reasons, like health and economic factors, that reinforce these religious rules? Let's take a closer look. Practical health and socio-cultural considerations. Beyond the theological and symbolic dimensions, there have always been practical reasons for why many ancient cultures, including Jews and Muslims, chose to avoid blood. Let's face it, before modern refrigeration and food safety practices, handling blood in food could be risky business. In the arid climates of the Middle East, where water was scarce and heat could quickly spoil food, consuming blood was more than just a spiritual risk. It was a health hazard. Pigs and other animals that produced blood could become carriers of diseases if the blood wasn't properly drained or preserved. Ancient physicians and healers noted that consuming blood might lead to illness, and these practical concerns likely played a role in reinforcing the religious prohibitions. In this sense, the avoidance of blood served a dual purpose. It was both a spiritual command and a practical safeguard against disease. There were also economic and social factors at play. In many ancient communities, food wasn't just about nourishment, it was also about maintaining social bonds and cultural identity. By adhering to strict dietary rules, Jewish and Muslim communities could set themselves apart from their neighbors, creating a sense of unity and trust within the community. Sharing a meal wasn't only a private act, it was a public declaration of identity and belonging. When everyone follows the same rules, it's easier to build a cohesive, supportive community. Over time, these practical concerns became intertwined with religious beliefs. What started as a sensible precaution against foodborne illness evolved into a powerful symbol of purity and obedience. The rules against consuming blood were not merely about health. They were about honoring a tradition that celebrated life and protected the community. Even as modern medicine has reduced the risks once associated with blood, these practices remain as a testament to the importance of tradition and identity. Modern science has in some ways confirmed that certain foods can pose risks if not handled correctly. But for most believers, the spiritual reasons far outweigh the practical ones. The fact that Jews and Muslims continue to avoid blood, even in an age of advanced food safety standards, shows that these rules have become a core part of their cultural and religious identity. In many ways, the practical challenges of ancient times have become symbolic. The difficulty of preserving blood without modern technology transformed a health risk into a symbol of life's sanctity. And while most people today understand that modern methods have largely eliminated these dangers, the old rules persist as a reminder of a time when every meal was a carefully considered act of faith and survival. With practical considerations in mind, let's now pull everything together. How do these different aspects, the scriptural foundations, symbolic meanings, and practical concerns, compare across the three traditions? Up next, we'll dive into a comparative analysis and synthesis of all these factors. Comparative analysis and synthesis. Let's take a step back and compare what we've learned. On one hand, both Jews and Muslims have long held the view that blood is sacred, a symbol of life that should remain untouched by human consumption. On the other hand, many Christians, influenced by the transformative message of the New Covenant, have reinterpreted the meaning of blood, even incorporating it into their most sacred rituals. When we look at the texts, we see clear similarities. In Judaism, the directive, "do not eat blood," comes straight from the Torah. In Islam, the Quran echoes this sentiment, reinforcing the idea that blood is off limits as part of maintaining purity. Both traditions use these rules not just as dietary guidelines, but as markers of identity. By following these rules, adherents show their commitment to a way of life that honors a higher power and sets them apart from the rest of society. In Christianity, however, the focus shifts dramatically. The story of Peter's vision and the subsequent teachings of Jesus and Paul represent a pivot from external adherence to internal transformation. For many Christians, the physical presence of blood in food is less significant than the spiritual meaning behind it. The Eucharist, which uses the imagery of Christ's blood, is a celebration of sacrifice, redemption, and a new beginning, an entirely different take on what blood represents. But it isn't all black and white. Even within each tradition, there are debates and varying interpretations. Some modern Jewish and Muslim scholars have re-examined these dietary laws in the light of contemporary science and cultural change, while some Christian communities continue to wrestle with the symbolism of blood in their liturgies and everyday practices. Despite these differences, one thing remains clear. These dietary practices are deeply rooted in each community's understanding of life, sacrifice, and what it means to be set apart. The contrasts are striking, but also reveal a shared human desire to connect with something greater than ourselves. Whether it's through a strict set of rules designed to preserve community purity, or through a liberating message of inner transformation, each tradition is trying to answer the same big questions. What is the value of life? How do we honor the sacred? And how do we maintain a sense of identity in an ever-changing world? By comparing these traditions side by side, we begin to see that the rules about blood are more than just food laws. They're a window into the soul of each community. They remind us that even everyday choices, like what to eat, can carry profound spiritual meaning. Next, we'll look at how these ancient practices continue to influence modern life. In a globalized world where diverse cultures and religions interact on a daily basis, understanding these differences isn't just interesting. It's essential for fostering respect and peaceful coexistence. Contemporary relevance and global implications. Today, the dietary practices that began thousands of years ago still have a huge impact on how people live and interact. For Jews and Muslims, avoiding blood isn't just about following an old rule. It's about preserving a way of life that has been passed down through generations. In modern communities, whether you're in a bustling city or a small town, you'll find that kosher and halal food isn't just a specialty. It's a way of maintaining cultural heritage in a fast-paced, globalized world. Restaurants, schools, and even international food companies now take these dietary laws seriously. Many establishments offer kosher and halal options, ensuring that everyone can share a meal without compromising their beliefs. This kind of accommodation shows how ancient practices can coexist with modern life, enriching our shared spaces rather than dividing them. For Christians, the approach to food is generally more flexible, but that doesn't mean the symbolic power of blood has disappeared. In many churches, the ritual of communion remains a central part of worship, a moment when the blood of Christ is remembered as a sign of ultimate sacrifice and love. This ritual serves as a reminder that while the physical rules may have relaxed, the spiritual significance is as strong as ever. Interfaith dialogue has also benefited from these discussions about food. When people from different backgrounds sit down together, sharing a meal that respects everyone's dietary laws, it opens up a conversation about deeper values and traditions. Understanding why someone avoids blood can lead to broader discussions about identity, history, and even how we care for one another in a multicultural society. There's also an ethical dimension to consider. As modern societies become more conscious of sustainability, animal welfare, and ethical food production, these ancient dietary laws can take on new meanings. For some, choosing to avoid certain foods becomes not only a matter of religious observance, but also a way to engage with modern ethical debates. The discussion around blood in food has even extended into conversations about how we treat animals and the environment. In today's world, where global travel and digital communication bring people from all walks of life into contact, understanding these dietary practices is key to building mutual respect. Whether you're dining in a family restaurant or attending a multicultural festival, being aware of why someone might refuse certain foods helps foster an environment of inclusion and empathy. Moreover, as societies continue to evolve, the dialogue about tradition and modernity remains vibrant. Scholars, religious leaders, and everyday people are continually reinterpreting these ancient rules in light of new discoveries and changing cultural landscapes. While the fundamental beliefs about the sacredness of life and the symbolism of blood remain intact, their practical implications continue to adapt to modern needs. As we move toward our final section, let's take one last look at all we've covered. We'll recap the major insights and reflect on how understanding these differences can help us appreciate our shared human heritage while respecting our unique traditions. As we draw this extensive exploration to a close, it's clear that the rules surrounding the consumption of blood in Judaism, Islam, and Christianity are far more than simple dietary guidelines. They are windows into the heart of each faith's understanding of life, purity, and divine relationship. We've journeyed through sacred texts, historical contexts, and evolving traditions, and now it's time to bring all these threads together. In this concluding section, we'll reflect on what we've learned, consider the broader implications of these practices, and think about how this deep-seated symbolism can guide us toward a more respectful and thoughtful coexistence in our modern world. Reflecting on the sacred nature of life. At the core of both Jewish and Muslim dietary practices lies the profound belief that blood is the essence of life. In ancient times, and indeed even today, this understanding formed the basis for a sacred prohibition. For Jews, the Torah repeatedly reminds us that the life of a creature is in its blood. This wasn't just a rule meant to regulate food, it was a powerful reminder that every living being carries a spark of the divine. The very act of abstaining from blood is a daily affirmation of this truth, a way for the community to honor the gift of life granted by God. Similarly, in Islam, the Quran clearly forbids the consumption of blood. The repeated injunctions in verses such as those in Surah Al-Baqarah not only serve as a dietary guideline, but also as a constant reminder of the sacred connection between life and its creator. For Muslims, these rules are not relics of the past. They are active, living expressions of a commitment to maintain purity in every facet of life. By choosing to avoid blood, Muslims reinforce the belief that life, in all its manifestations, belongs solely to Allah. This shared reverence for the life force has provided a common ground between two major religious traditions. Both see blood as a symbol so potent that its mishandling, whether by consumption or otherwise, risks defiling something that is ultimately sacred. This idea underscores the respect each tradition has for the divine spark present in every living being. It's a respect that transcends the physical act of eating and reaches into the realm of ethical, spiritual living. The transformative power of covenant and identity. Our journey has also taken us through the ways in which dietary laws have become key markers of identity. For Jews, keeping kosher is much more than adhering to a set of food rules. It's a living expression of a covenant that has been passed down for thousands of years. Every time an observant Jew sits down to a meal prepared according to these ancient guidelines, they are reminded of their unique relationship with God. The act of following these rules cements their identity as a people chosen to uphold a sacred tradition, a tradition that has provided them with continuity and resilience through centuries of change and challenge. In the same vein, Muslim communities have long embraced their dietary laws as a cornerstone of identity and belonging. The halal certification that many modern Muslims seek is not merely a label on food. It's a declaration of adherence to a long-standing tradition that has its roots in divine instruction. For Muslims, the act of choosing halal food is an everyday expression of submission to Allah, a way of living that reinforces the values of discipline, purity, and communal solidarity. While the Jewish and Islamic approaches emphasize the preservation of an external mark of purity, the Christian approach offers a stark contrast. Christianity's reinterpreting of these dietary restrictions, particularly through the lens of the New Covenant, marks a significant departure from the earlier focus on ritualistic adherence. In the New Testament, the transformation in understanding is clearly illustrated in Peter's vision in Acts 10, and in the teachings of Paul, who emphasized that what truly matters is not the food one eats, but the condition of one's heart. For many Christians, the inner life, the transformation brought about by faith in Christ, is far more significant than the external rules of the Old Covenant. This theological shift reflects a broader change from a focus on physical markers of purity to a celebration of internal renewal and redemption, bridging tradition and modernity. One of the most remarkable aspects of these dietary laws is how they have managed to remain relevant over thousands of years, even as the world around them has transformed dramatically. In an age of rapid technological advancement and globalized food markets, the ancient prohibitions on blood continue to serve as important markers of cultural and religious identity. Modern food production, certification processes, and international trade have all adapted to ensure that these traditions can be maintained in today's world. Whether it's kosher certifications in bustling cities or halal labels on supermarket shelves across the globe, these practices continue to thrive, providing tangible links to ancient wisdom and spiritual heritage. Yet, the survival of these traditions is not just about clinging to the past, it's also about finding ways to engage with the present. As we navigate the complexities of modern life, these ancient dietary rules offer us valuable lessons. They remind us that every meal is an opportunity to honor the sacredness of life, to be mindful of our actions, and to consider the ethical dimensions of our everyday choices. In a time when questions about animal welfare, sustainability, and ethical consumption are increasingly pressing, the principles underlying these dietary laws can inspire thoughtful reflection and responsible living. Fostering mutual respect and understanding. Perhaps one of the most important lessons from our exploration is the potential for these ancient practices to serve as bridges between different cultures and religious communities. In today's interconnected world, where diversity is the norm and cultural exchange is constant, understanding why people follow certain dietary practices can foster mutual respect and empathy. When we take the time to learn about the deep significance that underpins the avoidance of blood in Jewish and Muslim communities, or the transformative symbolism of blood in Christian rituals, we begin to see that these practices are not arbitrary rules, but meaningful expressions of faith. In settings as varied as interfaith dialogues, multicultural festivals, or even everyday shared meals, awareness of these traditions can help reduce misunderstandings and build stronger bonds between communities. It becomes clear that while the outward expressions of faith might differ, whether it's the strict adherence to kosher and halal laws or the symbolic celebration of the Eucharist, each tradition is rooted in a sincere desire to live in a way that honors life and upholds a sacred relationship with the divine. This kind of understanding is more important today than ever before. In a world often divided by differences, finding common ground in the reverence for life can open up pathways to genuine dialogue and cooperation, whether through shared meals that respect diverse dietary practices or through educational initiatives that highlight the historical and spiritual significance of these traditions. There is a tremendous opportunity to learn from one another and to celebrate the rich tapestry of human belief and culture. Embracing the lessons for a better future. As we look to the future, the enduring legacy of these ancient dietary laws can offer us guidance in addressing some of the ethical and practical challenges of our time. The careful attention to the sanctity of life, the commitment to maintaining purity, and the deep sense of communal identity that these practices inspire can all contribute to a more ethical, compassionate, and sustainable way of living. For instance, in the realm of food production and environmental stewardship, the principles underlying these dietary restrictions remind us to consider not just the immediate benefits of our food choices, but also their long-term impact on our health, our communities, and our planet. The idea that life is sacred, so sacred that even its most essential component, blood, must be treated with reverence, can encourage more responsible and thoughtful practices in agriculture, food processing, and consumption. It invites us to ask important questions about how our choices affect the natural world and the lives of those who depend on it. Moreover, the emphasis on mindfulness and intentionality in these traditions can serve as a powerful antidote to the fast-paced, often unreflective nature of modern life. In a society where convenience often trumps contemplation, the ritual of preparing and sharing food according to time-honored practices can be a way to slow down, connect with others, and cultivate a deeper awareness of the values that truly matter. Whether it's a family meal prepared with care or a community event that celebrates cultural traditions, these moments offer a chance to pause, reflect, and reaffirm our commitment to a way of life that honors the sacred and the meaningful. A call to reflection and action. As we conclude this extensive journey, I invite you to reflect on the ways these ancient practices resonate with your own life. Whether you identify with one of these traditions or simply appreciate the rich diversity of human culture, there's much to be learned from considering how something as everyday as what we eat can carry profound spiritual significance. Ask yourself, what does the food on my table say about my values? How do my choices connect me to a larger community, a deeper history, or a sense of purpose? In taking the time to ponder these questions, you are engaging in a practice that transcends mere consumption. It's an act of mindfulness, respect, and ultimately of connection. If there's one takeaway from our exploration today, it's that our shared human experience is enriched by the diversity of our traditions and the deep wisdom they embody. The ancient prohibitions and practices we've discussed are not relics of a bygone era. They are living traditions that continue to shape lives inform ethical decisions, and inspire communities around the world. They remind us that every meal can be an act of reverence, every ritual a way of expressing gratitude for the gift of life, and every choice an opportunity to honor the sacred. I encourage you to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Whether you have personal stories related to these dietary practices or reflections on how ancient wisdom can be applied to modern challenges, your voice matters in this ongoing dialogue. Let's use this space to learn from one another, celebrate our common humanity, and build bridges of understanding across our diverse cultural landscapes. Finally, if you found this exploration enlightening, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing this video with friends, family, and anyone who might be curious about the deeper connections between faith, culture, and everyday life. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new installment in our series on the rich tapestry of human traditions. Together, we can continue to explore the fascinating intersections of history, spirituality, and modern living, one thoughtful conversation at a time. Thank you for joining us on this long and meaningful journey. May these insights inspire you to live with a renewed sense of purpose, to honor the sacred in every aspect of your life, and to always seek understanding in a world that is as diverse as it is interconnected. Remember, the simple act of eating is never just about nourishment. It's a chance to celebrate life, connect with others, and recognize that we all share a common bond through the profound mystery of existence. Let's carry these lessons forward in our daily lives. In every meal you share, in every conversation about what matters most, let the wisdom of these ancient traditions remind you that life, in all its forms, is a precious gift. And in our modern world, where the pace of life often leaves little room for reflection, may this message be a gentle nudge to slow down, appreciate the beauty of diversity, and honor the sacredness that resides in every living being. Thank you once again for your time and your curiosity. We hope this journey has enriched your understanding of why some of the world's oldest and most respected traditions hold blood in such high regard. May your path be filled with insight, compassion, and the constant reminder that every choice you make can be an act of reverence for the gift of life. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and embrace the beauty of our shared human heritage.